As a human species, we really want to push the frontier of science and space exploration, then we have to work together and build on top of each other. The first factor why open source datasets are so critical for space exploration is this idea of universal participation. We have to all be able to use and reuse data and share it with everybody else so that everybody can engage and participate towards this common goal that we have.
Innovation begins with science, and in the near future, deep space exploration will become increasingly more important in expanding the boundaries of human achievement. To empower innovation and create new solutions to the world's most pressing problems, we must democratize access to deep space data and develop the ability to produce it faster and cheaper.
One of our main objectives at RIS is to provide African-based downstream space tech companies with opportunities to develop market readiness and access various data packages and cloud services to support the growth of their businesses. And one of the ways we are doing this is by facilitating the running of the annual Africa Earth Observation Challenge, which I am playing a leading role in developing this year.
Here, I study exoplanetary systems. I look at the over 5,000 planets outside of our own solar system and study their properties and architectures in an effort to learn more about how our own solar system fits into the bigger cosmic context. We do all of this with open source data. The only data I'm using is data that comes from the NASA Exoplanet Archive.
I'm a member of the Space Medicine and Life Sciences Project Group at the Space Generation Advisory Council. Today, I'm really pleased to be here to share with you some of our work on using open access space-derived data and how we can use it to benefit people on Earth, particularly on their health and well-being.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Next Generation Plenary organized by the Workforce Development and Young Professional Program Committee. We are really thrilled for you to join us for our panel today on the open source revolution and space data availability. We have an absolutely phenomenal lineup of students and young professionals who are competitively selected to share their work on how the increasing accessibility of data, software, and other tools has revolutionized the space sector. I'd like to now invite my co-organizer, Anya Shepard, to introduce our esteemed moderator, Jim Green.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Jim Green received his PhD in physics from the University of Iowa before working at NASA for 42 years. He has been NASA's chief scientist and was the longest-serving director of the Planetary Sciences Division. In 2015, Jim coordinated NASA's involvement with the film The Martian, and in 2017, an asteroid was renamed James Green in his honor. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, this is really an exciting time in terms of the ability to get access to ever-increasing volumes of data. And I want to be able to put some things in context. NASA's first mission in 1959, Explorer 1, its data was analyzed at the University of Iowa with punch cards and people plotting things. And it was very primitive, of course, by today's standards. And it wasn't until 1967 that NASA created its first archive, the National Space Science Data Center. Now, to get data, what you had to do was write a letter or call the help desk to be able to identify the data that may be archived, and then request it, and then receive it either on microfiche, microfilm, or magnetic tape, written at 800 bits per inch. Well, times have really changed. And in fact, NASA's first online archive by the National Space Science Data Center didn't happen until 1987, all right? First set of data online was the International Ultraviolet Explorer. And that really, of course, started a major trend with many data centers being able to start putting data online and providing access to it. Well, space data is really now quite ubiquitous. Our agencies are working hard to put things online and be able to provide access. And today we're going to talk about reaping the benefits of getting access to that data for all. And so this is why it's in a wonderful era. We have 4 highly talented early career scientists and engineers to tell us about their experiences. And I know you will enjoy this next hour. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Maheen to tell us what he's been up to in open source data.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good morning to one and all. My name is Maheen Barbu. I currently work as an innovation analyst at RISE, the Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability, based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm very delighted to be here today to share with you my insights on the topic of space data accessibility, particularly within the context of the African space sector. So, as a player in the global space sector, Africa has had limited sovereignty. The continent has been very heavily dependent on other countries for space infrastructure and access to space data. Space data, high quality space data can sometimes be very expensive, not affordable, and having access to such data can play a significant role in serving underdeveloped communities and stimulating economic growth, which is very important because Africa's space identity is mainly focused around the use of space data to solve socioeconomic and developmental challenges. So this year, I have been serving as the project manager for the 8th edition of the Africa Earth Observation Challenge, which is an annually run open innovation competition that aims to identify and empower startups from across the African downstream space tech startup ecosystem, provide who have developed innovative solutions using Earth observation and more broadly space-based data. And we just hope to provide them with support and tools that they would need to grow into successful businesses. I think throughout the past few years, with the support of our partners, Amazon Web Services, Planet Labs, Maxar Technologies, Esri, and Digital Earth Africa, to name a few, we've managed to provide startups with access to analysis-ready data and satellite imagery for R&D use, access to web-based spatial analysis platforms, access to cloud services for data storage and processing, as well as technical support for data analysis and interpretation. So I'm very grateful to be part of this panel of young space enthusiasts today, and I look forward to sharing with you the success of the Africa Earth Observation Challenge and the crucial role that it plays in helping support the development of the space startup ecosystem in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, that was great. Next panelist, Emma, please introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here this morning. I am delighted to be here today to talk about a topic that has been integral to my academic journey, the open source revolution and its impact on space science. I am a PhD candidate at Yale University studying exoplanet geometries and the planetary dynamics that can create these different architectures that we see. The field of astrophysics has a rich history of data sharing that dates back to first cultural astronomy and then the first astronomers to use telescopes and share their observations of celestial bodies in the night sky. That tradition has continued into the modern era, as Jim mentioned, as organizations like NASA and the ESA maintain these extensive databases that are available to researchers all around the world for use. They have all the mission data and a lot of actually data collected from astronomers using other telescopes that are not necessarily from NASA or the ESA as well. I've personally spent a lot of time working with these data through my research, where I've published work that uses only data from these open access archives. So I can speak firsthand to the importance of these in understanding our universe as moving forward. These resources, they really democratize astrophysics, and they make it possible for researchers from around the world to probe mysteries of our cosmos without regard for geographic location or institutional access. All you need is a computer and an internet connection to be able to access them. As we move forward, it's going to be really important that we keep this shared observatory accessible to all. These function as a shared observatory and are really a testament to the collaborative nature of the field, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. However, as much as I have enjoyed working with open access data, I've also run into the challenges that we face using it. I found myself frustrated with organization structures, interfaces, and just the data structures themselves and getting them to interface between different archives. And so I know that moving forward, as we move into an era with more and more accessible data, it's going to be really important that in order for it to be truly accessible, we have to think very thoughtfully about how to build archives that can interact with one another well and make it so that, as was said, it needs to be analysis-ready data. I'm really excited to be here and discussing with these awesome other panelists this important topic, and I hope that we can explore more about how to use these open source data for a space ecosystem that is accessible and open to all to be able to really advance space exploration for the common good.
Okay, wonderful. Mohammed, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed Iran Manish. I'm a project and operation manager at Constellar, but I've also worked for about 8 years as a system engineer in different companies, so large and small, working on space hardware development. And if there is one point of frustration that always come out is this: you feel that you're stuck in a relentless cycle of reinvention, right? Like there are all kinds of tests that you have to do at component level or elementary material and process level in space hardware development. And when you're doing them, you know that there are 100 other people doing the same test in 100 other startups. And that's very frustrating, and I think really slowing our industry a lot, because I don't know if we can imagine another industry doing that. For example, in construction, if every time they needed to build a house or a school, each company needed to generate its own table of material properties from scratch for each brick. It would have been crazy, but sometimes it really feels like that in the space industry. And I think at the end of the day, if in this room we all believe that to accelerate the pace of innovation, we have to share and collaborate more. If we think that collaboration that is helping us accelerate, then we have to make sure that we share so that we can build on top of each other. I just wanted to say also a story. I have a friend of mine a couple of years ago. She was working on an experiment which was supposed to fly on a sounding rocket. And on the launch day, there was an issue with the separation phase, and she lost most of her data. So she only had like 1 or 2 seconds of data for her research after having worked on it for a year. She was devastated, of course, and it was crazy because she knew that there were other people working on the same topic and data that was available, but she just couldn't access them. So she couldn't find anywhere any open source data to supplement her research, and of course she was stuck there. So it's stories like that that made me and a few of my friends co-found Lightspace, which is a new microgravity platform using glider sailplanes. And the idea here is not to just make it easier to generate data, but also like just to encourage the community to share more and collaborate more, because we don't want the barrier for the pushing the frontier of science and space exploration to be just a lack of access to data. So I'm very excited to be here and talking more about the engineering side of open data.
Great, thank you so much. One, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm going to stand up if you don't mind. Okay, so how many of you have heard of the 7 minutes of terror? All right, I see a few hands here and there. It's the 7 minutes that it takes for a spacecraft to land on Mars, and it's exactly in those 7 minutes that most of the Mars mission failures occur. Now imagine spending nearly a decade out of your entire career building something that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars just to see it crash at the very, very last moment. That sounds frustrating, right? Well, okay, now, have you ever heard of a plant called Calitragus? Okay, I don't really see any hands. Well, I'm sure at least some of you have seen it in a Western movie, but they are also very, very popular in the US and especially in deserts. But what's very interesting about this plant is its unique yet very efficient way to reproduce and survive in the very extreme environments. So what happens is that when the plant gets mature, it separates itself from its root and tumbles as it gets driven by the wind, just continuing to spread into the desert and, spread its seeds. And those are called tumbleweeds. And that's exactly the concept that our team has applied on Mars. Now, the tumbleweed rovers have three major advantages. First, because of their ability to deploy mid-air, as well as high payload mass, we're able to reduce the cost of a single measurement by 2 orders of magnitude. Second, as they're driven by wind, they're able to reach the areas on the Martian surface that have never been reached before, thus allowing us to have like a more global view of the Martian planet. Third, and most importantly, instead of relying on a single spacecraft not to crash into in those 7 minutes of terror, we're now able to distribute the mission risk across an entire fleet of tumbleweeds, an entire swarm. It's really as simple as not putting all of your eggs in one basket, because we all know what might happen, right? So that's what I think the answer is to making deep space data, specifically deep space data, more accessible to everyone. It's through reducing the cost and the risk of the missions. So now it is our time, and by us I mean all the people in the audience, in the panel, all students, professionals, scientists, government officials, really everyone. It is our time to transform the 7 minutes of terror into a decade of triumph. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Well, now we're going to enter an opportunity for me to quiz the team, with my vast experience in data. And you can always ask me sometime a little about the backstory of how we got 7 minutes of terror put together. I have plenty of stories like that. But we would like also an opportunity for the audience to ask questions, and this is where our new systems come into play. So if we can have on the screen the QR code for the sligo.com system, please be able to ask your question, and as we continue on with the dialogue here, I'll bring those questions up as we go along. All right, so let's talk about what you brought up, which of course is the African space sector. We're now also entering an era for which many countries are recognizing the importance of space. Now, I truly believe that we as a species cannot survive long without leveraging and using space. And so I am so delighted to see so many other countries begin the process of developing capabilities, leveraging space data in so many ways. And Africa is a perfect example of that. So, in your experience, Maheen, how has open data really impacted the African space sector?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim. So as I alluded to in my opening introduction there, Africa is mainly focused on the applications of space technologies. How do we leverage space data, as you mentioned, to solve socioeconomic and developmental challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges in Africa at the moment now is food insecurity. Even though close to 20% of the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa comes from agriculture, a lot of the traditional agricultural techniques that are employed are often inefficient. They don't produce high enough yields. So you're really starting to see new innovations in agriculture that are incorporating satellite data, in most cases open data from like Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 satellites, for things like crop monitoring and precision agriculture, which is greatly improving the efficiency of agriculture, and hopefully in the future will address this issue of food insecurity. Another interesting example was demonstrated in disaster risk mitigation back in 2021, when the Rwandan Space Agency worked with various international partners to support various governments with the monitoring of a volcanic eruption that took place in the DRC. It was Mount Nyiragongo. And they did this using interferometric analysis of Sentinel-1 data. And through this analysis, they were able to generate insights which helped emergency responders and decision makers evacuate close to 1 million people in just a few days. So this is a great example of how open data has impacted the lives of people here on the ground. As you were saying, that's been a great revolution, especially in Africa. And I think, like you were mentioning, the African countries are really starting to now open up to the idea of space and the possibilities that it brings for solving these challenges. And that's why you're seeing such rapid growth across Africa with new countries developing space programs. And so I think open data has been a major driver in that growth of the space sector in Africa. Yeah.
So I think what's really exciting about what's happened over the last several decades is, I think it was Landsat that originally started taking data and broadcasting it. So as it flies over a country, it's broadcasting data, and with the right equipment and capabilities, you can bring that data in, analyze it, and you can see how much soil is under cultivation, for example, and then be able to estimate that by the end of the growing season, are you going to import food or export food? So in addition to that, then that data rolls into archives, and you can do all kinds of retrospective analysis. And so we're seeing real-time data access and also retrospective access of data ever increasing. And these are really important for countries that are getting into the space sector. So I'm really excited to hear how that's going in Africa. So Emma, you brought up a couple important problems, all right, in terms of the data accessibility. So just because it's online doesn't make it easy to analyze. So what are some of those proactive data management techniques do you think we ought to be thinking about and implementing?
Yeah, so by way of example, to kind of set the scene for those challenges, I'll relay a little bit about the experience I've had working with this data. So there's a couple different archives that are online that I use regularly, and some have different data about the mass and radius of planets, and then there's another archive that has a lot of data about the magnitudes of the stars that the planets are orbiting. And I was working on a project where I needed to combine those data sets. And in principle, it should be quite easy to go to one website, download the data, and then go to the other website and download the data and match it together and then do the analysis. But instead of spending the morning 3 hours that I'd allotted, which I thought was pretty generous for being able to combine those data sets, I spent almost a week because I had to reformat the names of the stars and then learn how to use a website that was a little bit challenging to figure out how to download the data in the correct structure so that I could actually begin to then write code that could interface the two databases together and pull it all out and get out a data set that I could use for the analysis. So you end up spending almost as much time making the data into a usable format as is spent actually doing initial analysis of the data. And that is, in my opinion, not a sustainable way to move forward with as we get more and more data. It's a really good problem to have that we have so much data, but as we go forward, we have to really think about how to address it. And I think that there's two sides to it. First, there's the technical side. We have to figure out what are some norms for how to store data, what kind of structures do we put it in, and in this case, I'm thinking about astrophysics data, so what are our common data formats, what are our common ways to download it, what are our common ways to store the names of different objects, because that's often the identifiers that are used to coordinate between archives. The second side of it is I would argue it's a social and cultural side. We need to figure out what are the norms of data sharing, especially as other countries begin to develop their data sets and we have more and more data out there. We need to know what are our ways that we keep it, how do we keep it online, so that data sets don't have to be recreated again to fit into an architecture. We should have a set of norms that define a culture of data sharing that can then inform how it is stored, and that makes it so that what is a week-long process now can be a day-long process for a researcher in the future.
Yeah, these are really important points. And early on in my career, I was head of the National Space Science Data Center, so we were working hard with the community, and these are the projects that were archiving their data, to think about standard formats. And astrophysics in particular came up with the FITS format, but that doesn't do everything. And as you point out, you needed to be able to handle data of different formats, and then there's the software aspect of it. So it can be complicated. So there's got to be ways that, in particular, early career scientists and engineers can get involved in feeding back to these projects what's working and what's not working, what can be put in standard format, and then actually get access to that data through important software that's also being developed to do it.
Can I actually add one more point to that?
Oh, please.
I think that is also really important to point out, because I think that every archive that is created is done with the absolute best intentions for this is going to be super easy to use, going to be super user friendly. Nobody sets out to create a hard to use archive. That's why I think building this culture is really important, because if we have a standard for this is how this data is going to be stored, these are the formats we're going to use. We have our FITS files, but more often than not, we need them in other formats as well. What are the standards that everybody's going to be used, and who can the projects talk to really early on in a mission? Who do they talk to figure out what these formats are, so that there's no retroactive creation of an archive, or in the future, it's then easy to interface, because a lot of archives, NASA's been keeping these archives around for a long time, so that in the future, when you're going back to look at archival data, which is really important, especially in astrophysics, it's just as easy to use as the data that is from very recent missions.
Yeah, so once again, I encourage our early career scientists and engineers to find ways to get involved, be on certain committees, and provide input that would really help the downstream analysis of the data that's indeed coming into the archive. But this brings up another problem.
Can I quickly add
please.
a little bit to what
Yes.
Emma said? Yeah, so I very much agree with all of your points, and especially since it's not only relevant for astrophysics and for like exoplanetary research and all the other interesting fields of science, but it's also about really enabling other scientific missions to take place, right? For example, for tumbleweeds, our systems engineering team had to simulate the way the tumbleweeds would, just spread across the surface of Mars, and for that we have to use data that's already accessible. In this case, the Mars Climate Database, and I've seen their frustration the last few months trying to figure out how that works, and then the immense joy after it happened. And it's really about being able to create this chain reaction, because after we standardize data sets and make sure that others can use it, we're able to use that data to create other science missions and have more data, and the cycle continues.
Well, it's not just access to scientific data we should be worried about. And I think there's a particular area that has lacked standardization and important thinking about putting that data online, and that's the engineering data.
Yeah, exactly. When we talk about hardware data, everybody in companies they get stressed because they think about we're talking about you have to share your your IP and your high-level design, but that's not really what the question is here. Is that we're way behind what the level of collaboration that we see in the space data teams all around the world. But at the same time, there are so many tests being done at on all kind of component materials. And they have to be repeated every time because they're not shared, or if they're shared, it's by the manufacturer for some specific conditions that they're not sharing the raw data, but it's like a slide for a commercial purpose. So we really have this difficulty in hardware engineering, the same way that you have to spend a lot of time in finding the data that you need. In our case, we often don't find them at all, and then so you have to go again and then prepare a test, which makes it even more costly. And it's not. I don't think I'm saying that the large companies should spend money generating those databases and then give it for free, but we just have to find a better way of collaborating, maybe learning from the data, the way the science data is shared. I know that, for example, both ESA and NASA have a space material database that they share, but they're maybe they're not updated as much as they could. There are still a lot of gaps, and again, it could also probably be made more accessible as well. But yeah, it's just another way of. But people in companies, they get really stressed about when you say, I want to share that data, because they think you're sharing their competitive advantage. But it's not the case. It's like space science data. There are a lot of data that we have at low level, which honestly, that's not what makes your company unique or your product unique. But we just don't have the culture yet in the hardware part to share them. And to come back to what Maheen was saying, the way those emerging space nations can benefit from space data or scientific space data, they could also benefit from those difficult to generate basic material properties data.
Yeah, so there's been, just as we've been talking about, huge strides in the ability to archive, put online a lot of scientific data, and it's just growing so well and so voluminous, it's even hard to keep online. And we're moving into structures like the cloud and providing cloud access to some of these large databases. But I have to tell you, the engineering data, we just have not cracked yet. No. So I would encourage you, the engineers in the audience and our early career engineers in particular, to be able to think about how important the data is that they're involved in each and every one of the missions that they do, and work to be able to put the right set of information online that is beneficial to all. And there's a lot to do in that area. Did you want?
Yeah, so I think probably the main challenge that comes is really the cost. And so that was the idea with Lightspace, is that, okay, if we have a platform which can recreate on ground some level of microgravity, which is affordable, then maybe we can then promote using that, generating more data and then sharing it. And so ourselves, we started generating some data about the motion and attitude of objects in microgravity, that then, and we are putting them completely online, free for everyone to use. They're on a GitHub repository. And also that way, if tomorrow there is someone from any country who's developing a new software for active debris removal, identification or anything, they can use those data and work on them. So we're trying to push that, but yeah, we need more people to join.
So, One, with your interaction with the Tumbleweed mission, how has that really increased access to space data?
So the Tumbleweed mission, the whole point of what we're doing is to be able to, cut down the costs, and that way make sure that more players of the industry players, not only the great major companies and the agencies, but also all kinds of other individuals or small organizations and institutions can become part of it. It's with that data that we can later create a better understanding of Mars as a planet, and then better explore other planets, and just make sure that the knowledge that we get from space we can apply back to Earth.
Indeed, some of the aspects of that data is quite sophisticated. What are some of the technical skills that are really needed for understanding and implemented soft re-entry, landing, and navigation on the surface of Mars? Can you comment on that?
Do you mean the skills of the people that are working on the topic?
Yes.
It's really about the ability to use the data that we have currently available to analyze the missions that have already happened and see what the specific parts of the previous missions, for example, that went wrong, and really iterating. Like what we do in Tumbleweed is just take a problem and make sure that we're able to solve it by doing it over and over again until it works.
So we talk a lot about getting access to online data, but that's not the whole story, because information is data too. So information about data is important, and many of the archives work hard to be able to develop that information package that allows you to then select the data. So what has been your experiences in interacting with information systems that lead you to the data you want? And is it easy? Is it hard? Is there a lot of room for improvement? What should we be doing? Panel?
I can jump in on that to start. I have found that in a lot of cases, especially on NASA websites that I've worked with, there's really good documentation of what are the data that you're getting? What are the meanings of each of the columns? Which is super important, because there are times where that data doesn't have things like even the units on something, which is vitally important to understanding what's going on. So having those kind of documentation is really important. I think that as a whole, open source data communities that are in different groups within science and engineering that are trying to practice this, we can learn a lot from the software world for this. A lot of Python packages, which is what I work with mostly, are really well documented, and there's a standard format for even documenting those. And I think that if we take inspiration from that, we can take the already existing foundation, which is, in my opinion, quite strong actually for that, how do we get the information that leads us to the data, and build it out in a way that is even more understandable and standardized across the different archives.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I think for engineering, the issue you have is probably the same than what you see when they're advertising the battery life of a phone, which is okay. What are exactly the condition that you say one full day? And so sometimes, especially if it's engineering data that you find through vendors and suppliers, they are in very specific lab conditions, ideal conditions that you're not necessarily aware of them, and so you get disappointed very soon. And so it's again part of this. They have to include the documentation and also the context of how these values were measured and what was all of this information.
Any other comment? Well, let me add something that I thought would come up but hasn't, and that is, in reality, there's in many ways, in many cases, no substitute from really getting access to personal experience in using data. So that is investigators that are on the team, that are part of analyzing data. You can find these by reading the appropriate papers, seeing individuals that are really part of some exciting discoveries, leveraging and using the data so you know they have intimate knowledge of it. And then being able to go to conferences like the IAC and others that then enable you to make that personal contact. So not everything's going to be online. Not everything's going to be able to, information systems be able to solve your problems. So you need to be able to have those personal contacts that are so important. Now, I was always afraid that during the COVID era, when everyone now is not going to as many conferences and that personal interaction wasn't going to occur as it has in the past, that would really hurt our early career scientists and engineers because they need to get access to the experts. So I'm now looking out and encouraging our more senior members of the community, meaning those involved in data sets and data analysis for longer periods of time, to continue to go to conferences and meet and work with the early career scientists and engineers. So this is some exciting topics. So let me go back to a couple of questions from the audience. Here's one. How would you use open data to facilitate young people with no STEM background to get into the space sector? Okay, with the dead silence, let me just throw out an idea. There's no substitute for beautiful images. Image archives, the ability to see beautiful objects, being able to use them in your presentations and interacting with students in schools and those that are interested in how that image is created, let alone what does it mean. So the imaging is really important, but not all data is images. There's a lot of squiggly line people out there that do tremendous science with plots. So, pardon me. Thoughts?
Yeah, definitely images, and then also I think there are all kind of if we focus on using those information for outreach and education, then you also find in engineering all kind of small robots or small experiment that you can find online, and all the information is shared, and so that's something that you can easily access and then share it with other people in your classroom or outside. There are actually maybe more than we think, and maybe that's also a topic here. It's just can they find all the things that are available to them if there are a small rover bike, or if there are images, do people know those who are not in STEM or in the space industry, do they know how to access them? Because there are all kind of resources and material that could be used for those exact reasons.
Another example of that is the Exoplanet Archive, which is what I use to get all of my data, which is an interesting place because it has both the very technical data that anybody who's doing any research on exoplanets is going to have gone there at least once, but it's also a very accessible site for the public. If you Google the name of an exoplanet, or if you Google exoplanets and find yourself on the website, you can end up on pages that tell you about each individual planet and do some visualization of where it is or how big it is in relation to other objects in our solar system that you might be more familiar with. And then at the same time, as you're seeing those visualizations that are designed to be quite accessible to the public, you're also seeing the data below that is what researchers are using every day. So I think one way to do that is to build into these archives ways that if somebody stumbles across a website online that's open, they can both see, if you're a researcher, you can get the data you want and go do analysis with it, but if you're somebody who's new to it and doesn't have a STEM background, you can explore and learn something new and be learning it from the same place that researchers are working from, which adds another level of excitement to the inquiry.
Okay, any other comments? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, all right? And I'll talk a little bit about proprietary rights that scientists have and how that's evolved over time. In particular, NASA in the 60s and well into the 70s and a little bit into the 80s, many of the scientists that worked so hard developing instruments, launching them, getting the data, wanted to be able to have exclusive rights. So this made it difficult for archives to be able to obtain the data in a timely manner, or at least from a perspective of getting it in the archive within 6 months or a year or so. But a lot of that's changed. Some of the missions that are coming out now dictate that that data comes immediately into the archive as fast as they can get it in, allowing everyone to be able to have access to the data on a level playing field. So what's your experience in that particular area? Are you for proprietary periods where scientists that work so hard to develop an instrument have an opportunity to at least get a couple top discoveries out? Is that a problem or not? What's your thoughts on that?
I can maybe just add a little bit from, trying to design a space mission and how we want to make use of the data. So the point of making it more accessible from what I think is by reducing the cost of being able to get a data point, we're then able to just disperse it across a higher variety of stakeholders. So it's not going to be only the people, for example, who are paying, not only the agencies, for example, who are paying for the data, but maybe other stakeholders as well. It could be a smaller company that is interested in developing a lander for Mars or a different type of object. So, yeah.
Other comments?
I can also add to that and say that I think that from a telescope data perspective, so not a mission data perspective, but when you propose for telescope time, often that data that you collect comes with a proprietary period before it is made public onto archives. And that can be really valuable for researchers who spent time developing a particular science question and need to have time to analyze the data before everything that they collected is then available to the public as well. And I think that that's a good kind of middle ground solution for that, is to give researchers, give mission teams a little bit of time with the data themselves, and then afterwards, after that time is up, make it available to the general population.
Yeah, many of the space agencies interact with their projects and then make decisions on how to do that. Once again, input from the rest of the scientific community is so important to be able to determine how that will go. But I have to say, I've seen so many fantastic discoveries come out from archival research. The Hubble archive, as an example, has an enormous amount of data for which, even though individual papers have been written on individual observations, but cutting across a whole class of observations, new and exciting discoveries have come out. So indeed, the concept that there's just not enough science in the archive, and if we let the PIs have all the glory, is really an old idea, because the data sets that are coming in are so rich, and there's so many fantastic things that can be done. So I'm in favor of putting the data in the archive as fast as possible and letting everyone get access to it. Okay, so going back to a couple of our audience questions. Let's see. All right. Okay. How can we look for open data? In other words, where are open data sources that you go? Is there a curated list of open source data And how do you get access to understanding that this is a set of data that you want to go for? What's the starting point?
Talking to people, like you were saying. It's sometimes so hard to find what website you're looking for, or you think the data doesn't exist, and it becomes really frustrating. And then you talk to someone and they point you to an obscure URL that you maybe didn't know existed, and all of a sudden you have the data that you've been looking for. So right back to what you were saying, talk to people.
Other comments? How do you get access to data that you want?
Yeah, I think there are. So for like also talking especially to like, I think what you can easily access are the papers, right? So you can always contact those people as well, and it's sometimes surprising to see that people are very happy to share their data, even if it's like engineering data done in a lab for a specific purpose. But you know, they weren't necessarily thinking about it when they were just publishing the paper. They just put an illustration, but didn't share or put anywhere their raw data without being especially against it. So I would also encourage you to again talk to more people and try to see what you can get there.
Any other comments? Okay, this is kind of a follow-up. How do we inform the community what and when data and data products are available? What's the process that we should get involved in?
Yeah, it's true that at the moment there is no good process. I think you have to advertise it, publish it, probably use a lot of social media and knowing where your community that could be interested in it is, and going to them and sharing with them. But yeah, it's a great idea. If there was somewhere centralized, probably with all of these sources of information, it would have been so much easier. Like there is no, like we were talking about that there's open source databases for science, but there is no such thing like a list of component or list of diode that would work in that type of mission or that type of environment. There is nothing centralized. So definitely centralizing and having something that everybody can go and access from there would be super useful.
Any other comments? So when I became head of planetary science at NASA in 2006, one of the first things that I did was to have one of the institutes that we work with create an electronic, what we'll say, newsletter, an email blaster. And in that, we want to make sure we talk about data that's becoming available in the archive. So for early career scientists and engineers, look for getting on these email blaster lists in the areas that you're interested in. I know there's one in heliophysics, there's certainly now one in planetary science. There are other email blasters that come out in several of the other disciplines, but this is the first heads up that data is coming into the archive. Any other comments? Have you ever used any of those? Have you ever become part of that? Okay, once again, for questions to our esteemed panel, we're using the sligo.com system. Slido, pardon me. Here's the QR code or the URL. Okay. Here's an interesting one. What are the most efficient websites that we can get data from in the field of aerospace engineering? In other words, is that the way we start to get access in information engineering area, is the websites?
Yeah, I think if it's about like the aerospace engineering in the sense of the physics and the engineering equations that are behind of it, definitely websites are the best thing to see. The other aspect that's super critical for space, because every time you build hardware, you're asked to do all kind of testing and making sure that they're going to be qualified and they're going to work with the environment that you're sending them to. And so for those, and that's what I was mentioning a bit earlier, is that you need to know, for example, is the material, what is going to be its operating temperature. You want to know, what type of mechanical properties they have, and those for all kind of material, all kind of grade, all kind of naming convention. So there are two main material database, one with ESA and NASA that you can also check. So you just type in a space material database, and you'll find there all kind of information about those specific material. Something else that's also super critical in space engineering, especially for like missions that we discussed, like Sentinel and other Earth observation satellite, is that there is a contamination by some materials that you want to avoid, and so that's also something that you would find in those databases, like how much are they going to outgas and how much those contaminants could impact at the end, the performance of your mission. So those are super interesting, and they don't put the raw data, but some amount of data, and just to help you make a better material selection and build your mission later.
Other comments? Okay, I would be really remiss if I didn't start touching on this next really important topic, and that is, how can artificial intelligence be used in the area of data management, data access, data analysis, and have you any experience in those areas?
Well, I mean, maybe the obvious one is that, I'm not an AI expert, but from what I understand, like the most data that you have, the better they're going to work. And also, I think they're very good at finding links, between database or columns that might not be, obviously connected. And so there, I think if you have those databases and they're public, then those models would be able to run and be trained more efficiently as well. On the engineering side, I think there is a lot we have to do to include those tools as well and try to look at building new systems or new design in another way, instead of just basing it on what has been done before, looking again at first principle and building from that. And their AI can also help us explore a new space of solution. So that's my first comment.
Any other comments?
I also think that AI can play a tremendous role in helping make data even more accessible, because one thing, we're learning that it's really good at a lot of things, but one thing it's really good at is writing code for specific purposes. And at the level that people, like students in the classroom who might be interacting with the data, can use AI to assist them to write code to be able to interact with data that otherwise might be unintelligible. And they can also be really useful for converting data. So things that took a long time to do by hand, if you plug it into a tool that can convert formats for you, match names in a way that a coding language on its own couldn't, I think those are some of the really easy, step one things we can use AI for as we look to make open source data more accessible.
Absolutely. Any other comments? Well, I would really encourage our early career scientists and engineers not to ignore AI, but embrace it and be able to understand it and be able to look for ways to implement it. Because as Emma pointed out, rightly so, there's so many advantages of doing that, just even in getting some of the simple tasks done. But it's a wave of the future, and you just absolutely got to get involved. So let me change the topic again in a slightly different way. There's a whole variety of challenges that have come out. There's the NASA App Challenge. There's just all kinds of things that connect early career and younger individuals who are interested in seeing if the space sector is what they want to get involved in, and then get involved in these challenges and get really excited about. But there's the African Earth Observation Challenge that's happened, and I don't know much about that. So Maheen, can you tell us what role that the African Earth Observation Challenge has played in harnessing space-based data for the benefit of humanity in the African region?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. So we're noticing that innovation is really growing in Africa. There's a lot of new entrepreneurs and startups that are in parallel industries that are now starting to utilize satellite data to really develop their solutions. And I think it's quite evident that the future of the space sector in Africa is going to be driven largely by the private sector. So in light of that, in 2015, REES, in partnership with SANSA, established the Africa Earth Observation Challenge, which, as I mentioned, is an open innovation challenge that aims to identify startups that have utilized Earth observation or space-based data in innovative ways. And obviously, we provide them with the support and tools they need to grow into sustainable businesses. The thing with startups is they usually try to leverage as much as they can open data from satellites, like I mentioned, Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2. But obviously, this open data has limitations in terms of temporal and spatial resolutions, and sometimes they need higher resolution data. So one of the goals of the Earth Observation Challenge through the support of our partners is to provide these startups with access to that high resolution data. For example, last year's winner was a company called Agribora based in Kenya. They provide a platform that leverages Earth observation data to help smallholder farmers for crop monitoring. And up until the challenge, they'd been using Sentinel-2 data to do their analysis, which was very limited in terms of spatial temporal resolution. And through the challenge, they were able to access high resolution data through our partner Maxa, which really helped them enhance their solution. And I think this is one of the goals of the challenge, is to really help these startups develop their solutions further and really have a greater impact on their local communities and beyond that as well.
Any other comments? Have you participated in any of those international challenges that have come out from NASA, ESA, and some of the other space agencies? Had experience in those areas?
I had participated at a NASA App Challenge,
Yeah.
and actually it was for us. So I'm from Belgium, and it was an opportunity for me and my friends from different countries to just gather somewhere, and so we picked one randomly in Vienna, and participated there. And it was super interesting, because one, you learn actually very easily. So maybe that's a good way, as you're saying, to get introduced to how to find the right data. So it was a good way of figuring out where the data are, and then see how you can use them for a specific question. And there, of course, in the context of these space challenges or hackathons, you have people who have already a lot of materials that they can share with you and help you access those data and use them. So definitely encourage people who haven't participated yet in hackathons or the NASA App Challenge to do it, because it's going to be an easy way for you to get introduced to what type of data is available and what you can do with them.
Well, yeah. Well, I personally haven't participated in any of the challenges. I am a very big believer in learning through practice and through, just hands-on trying to make something happen. And there are a lot of organizations internationally available, as well as probably at your university, to just join and try and see how much you like it.
Okay, other comments? So let me ask you kind of another wild question that is related to data, and that is, what is your preferred software? I mean, you're probably going to laugh when I tell you that the only languages I speak are Fortran and C++, all right? And those are old skills, but Fortran is still one of the major software elements in supercomputers, okay? So what are the preferred software elements that you use to get access and analyze data?
Well, back when I was a student a few years ago, Python was my go-to option.
Python, yeah.
Very intuitive interface, so that was, yeah.
Astronomy has also really embraced Python. It's where most of the packages that astronomers use are built, and it's what the data that we use is most easily interfaced with. And it's I would argue, compared to some other languages, it's more intuitive to pick up. So it's been a really powerful tool for people who are coming into astronomy who maybe don't have a computer science background, who can then learn Python almost on the fly as they become astronomers.
I mean, for engineering, we're going to the same direction. We're getting rid of MATLAB. I think more and more after university, we switched to Python. So that's more for the scientific calculation and like the engineering calculation. And then, of course, like, if we talk about onboard computing or the processing of images, then there it would be other languages, more low level.
I can only agree with Emma mostly, actually, in this case. It's Python all the way.
Okay, well, this has really been a wonderful panel, and we could do this all day, of course. I have so many other questions that I want the panel to answer, but we're in the last phase of our meeting, and we're in the closing session. So I'd like to ask our panel for any closing thoughts. So let's start with Maheen.
Yeah, thanks. I think the space sector in Africa is really developing very quickly, also in other developing countries, the space is really starting to take off. And a large part of that is having access to open data, whether it's startups in those regions utilizing open data to develop innovative solutions, or governments just using the open data to help solve these societal challenges like food insecurity, or disaster risk management, or climate change, which is a big issue globally as well. So yeah, that's my takeaway message.
Emma?
Awesome. Well, first I want to thank the rest of the panelists and Jim for this wonderful discussion. I think as we move forward with this era of open source data and a world that has more and more data accessible, hopefully, as we move forward, I'm really excited for how it can be a way for different industries to work together. I'm excited for how, like we talked about, engineering can be learned from science and academia and histories of data sharing, and also how, in turn, academia can learn from the industry and move forward with best practices and standards so that all together we move into an era that really is accessible for the general public, for students, for researchers, all around, a way to use this data that we're getting from space in advancement of humanity. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Mohammed?
Yeah, 2 points for me. One is that I think we really have to learn from our colleagues in space science data, how to share and collaborate a bit more. And then the other one is that, so on your side, share more as well, and don't be afraid. Like, not every piece of data that you have in your company is those like IP protected one. There are a lot of like low level one that we could share, and that would be super helpful to everyone else in the community.
Oni?
I think we live in a very exciting age of just technology becoming so much cheaper with everything that's happening with the development of computers and telephones and games and literally anything you can think of. And it would be a pity if we don't use it for space as well, and if we don't find the applications of the cheap technology and make sure that we can do more and more science with it. So I just want to encourage everyone to join our mission, my colleagues' missions, and make the space more accessible for everyone.
Well, that's it for today in this area of open data, but hopefully that's just the start of the dialogue that our early career scientists and engineers can get involved in, and those that are well established to help them get access to data. Thanks so very much, and let's thank our panelists.